The spring social of 1875 was supposed to be Violet Ansley's night of triumph, the evening Gerald Whitman would finally propose. Instead, she stood frozen in the center of Copper Creek's community hall, tears streaming down her face as Gerald announced his engagement to another woman. The crowd's gasps turned to whispers, pity mixed with scandal. But then a stranger stepped forward, a weathered cowboy with kind eyes and calloused hands. What he did next would change everything. Stay with us until the end and comment what city you're watching from so we can see how far this story travels. The late April sun hung low over Copper Creek, Colorado, painting the Rocky Mountain foothills in shades of amber and rose. Spring had come late that year, and the town's residents were eager to celebrate its arrival with the annual social, a tradition that brought together ranchers, merchants, miners, and their families from miles around. The community hall, a modest wooden structure at the edge of Main Street, had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbon, and the scent of fresh-baked bread and roasted meat drifted from the tables along the western wall. Violet Ansley had spent weeks preparing for this evening. At 22, she was considered one of Copper Creek's most eligible young women, the daughter of Charles Ansley, whose ranch supplied beef to half the territory. Her mother had died when Violet was 15, leaving her to manage the household and learn the intricacies of ranch life alongside her father. She'd grown strong and capable, but tonight she wore her finest dress, a pale lavender silk her father had ordered from Denver, and her dark hair was swept up in an elegant twist. She wanted to look perfect, because tonight she was certain Gerald Whitman would finally propose. Gerald was the son of Copper Creek's banker, a man of education and refinement who'd returned from 2 years in Boston with polished manners and ambitious plans. He'd been courting Violet since Christmas, calling on her every Sunday after church, bringing her books of poetry, speaking of the future they would build together. Her father had reservations. He found Gerald too smooth, too concerned with appearances, but Violet had been charmed. Gerald represented something different from the rough-hewn ranch hands and miners who made up most of Copper Creek's male population. He spoke of art and culture, of traveling to San Francisco, and perhaps even Europe. He made her feel sophisticated, worldly. She'd been so certain of his intentions that she'd confided in her closest friends, Mary Catherine and Louisa, who'd helped her choose the dress and practiced elaborate hairstyles. They'd giggled together about wedding plans, about what kind of house Gerald might build, about the life of comfort and culture that awaited her. The social had begun at 7 o'clock, just as the spring twilight deepened into night. Lanterns were lit around the hall, casting warm pools of golden light across the dance floor. The musicians, a fiddler, a guitarist, and a man with a battered accordion struck up a lively reel, and couples began to form. Violet stood near the refreshment table with Mary Catherine and Louisa, scanning the crowd for Gerald. He'd promised to meet her here, had said he had something important to discuss. "There he is," Mary Catherine whispered, nudging Violet's arm. Gerald entered through the main doors, looking handsome in a new suit, his blonde hair carefully pomaded. But he wasn't alone. On his arm was a young woman Violet didn't recognize, petite and blonde, wearing an expensive-looking dress of deep blue silk with elaborate lace trim. The woman clung to Gerald's arm with obvious familiarity, laughing at something he said. Violet's stomach dropped. "Who is that?" Louisa frowned, leaning closer. "I've never seen her before. Maybe she's visiting someone?" But the way Gerald looked at the woman, the way his hand rested possessively on hers, told a different story. Violet watched, her chest tightening, as Gerald led the blonde woman directly to the center of the hall. The music was between songs, and conversations continued around them, but Gerald raised his hand, calling for attention. "Friends, neighbors," Gerald's voice carried across the hall with practiced ease. "I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment. I have wonderful news to share." The conversations died away. All eyes turned toward Gerald and the woman beside him. Violet felt Mary Catherine's hand grip her arm, heard Louisa's sharp intake of breath. She couldn't move, couldn't look away, even as dread pooled in her stomach like ice water. "This beautiful lady," Gerald continued, beaming at the blonde woman, "is Miss Penelope Hartford of Boston. We met during my time in the East, and after a proper courtship, I'm delighted to announce that she has agreed to become my wife." The words hit Violet like a physical blow. The hall erupted in surprised murmurs and polite applause. She saw Mrs. Henderson from the mercantile look sharply in her direction, saw Tom Brewster, the blacksmith, shake his head with disapproval, saw the knowing glances exchanged between the older women, the mixture of pity and scandal in their expressions. Everyone knew Gerald had been courting her. Everyone knew she'd expected a proposal, and now everyone was watching to see how she would react to this very public humiliation. "Violet," Mary Catherine whispered urgently, "let's go outside, come on." But Violet's feet wouldn't move. She stood frozen, watching as Gerald accepted congratulations as Penelope Hartford smiled prettily and showed off a ring that caught the lamplight. Gerald hadn't even looked in her direction, not once. It was as if their months of courtship had meant nothing, as if she meant nothing. The first tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it, then another. And suddenly she couldn't hold them back anymore. Her carefully constructed composure shattered, and she stood there in the center of the crowd crying like a child, while whispers rose around her like a tide. "Oh, that poor girl. Did you see her face? I always said that Whitman boy was no good. Charles Ansley won't be pleased about this. Someone should take her home." The humiliation was complete. Not only had Gerald betrayed her, but he'd done it in the most public way possible, and now she was making it worse by crying in front of the entire town. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her legs wouldn't obey. She could only stand there, tears streaming down her face, while the social continued around her and Gerald danced with his fiancée as if Violet Ansley had never existed. That's when she felt a hand on her arm, gentle but firm. "Miss," a deep voice said quietly, "would you care to step outside for some air?" Through her tears, Violet saw a man she didn't recognize. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were clean but worn, canvas pants, a work shirt, a leather vest that had seen better days. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, and they looked at her with such genuine concern that it made her want to cry harder. "I don't know you," she managed to say, her voice breaking. "No, ma'am, you don't. Name's Colton Chase. I just rode into town this afternoon looking for work. Came to the social because folks said it was the best way to meet the community." He offered a small, sad smile. "Seems like maybe I picked a difficult evening." Despite everything, Violet almost laughed. "That's one way to put it." "Come on," Colton said gently. "Let's get you some air. You don't need all these folks gawking at you." He was right. The whispers were getting louder, the stares more pointed. Violet let him guide her toward the door, grateful for his steady presence. Mary Catherine and Louisa started to follow, but Colton shook his head. "Let her have a moment," he said quietly. "She'll be all right." Outside, the night air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the mountains. The sounds of the social, music, laughter, conversation, were muffled by the wooden walls. Violet walked a short distance from the building and then stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. The tears kept coming, and she hated herself for it. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick. "You must think I'm ridiculous." "I think," Colton said carefully, "that you just had your heart broken in front of half the town. I think you've got every right to cry about that." Violet looked at him properly for the first time. His face was weathered, lined by sun and wind and hard living. There were scars, a thin one through his left eyebrow, another along his jaw. But his eyes were kind, and he stood at a respectful distance, giving her space. "You saw what happened?" she asked. "Hard to miss. That fellow, Whitman, is it?" He made sure everyone saw. Colton's voice carried a note of disgust. "That wasn't an announcement. That was a performance, and a cruel one." "He was courting me," Violet said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "For months. He said, he implied, I thought—" She broke off, unable to continue. "You thought he was going to propose to you," Colton finished gently. "And instead he showed up with another woman on his arm and announced their engagement. In front of everyone I know." Violet wiped at her eyes, knowing her careful makeup was ruined. "I must look like such a fool." "You look like someone who trusted the wrong person," Colton said. "That doesn't make you a fool. It makes him one. for not recognizing what he had. There was something in his voice, a sincerity that was completely different from Gerald's smooth compliments. Violet found herself actually looking at this stranger, this cowboy who'd appeared out of nowhere to help her. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Come outside with me, I mean. You don't know me." Colton was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I know what it's like to hurt," he said finally, "and I know what it's like to hurt alone with people watching. Nobody should have to go through that if there's someone around who can help." Before Violet could respond, the door to the hall opened and Gerald stepped out, Penelope still on his arm. He spotted Violet and Colton, and his expression shifted, surprise then irritation. "Violet," Gerald said, his tone patronizing, "I hope you're not making a scene. I know this might be unexpected, but surely you understand—" "I understand perfectly," Violet said, her voice stronger than she felt. "You led me to believe you were serious about courting me while you were actually engaged to someone else. You humiliated me in front of the entire town. I understand exactly what kind of man you are, Gerald." Gerald's face flushed. "Now see here. I never made you any promises." "You made me plenty of promises," Violet shot back. "You just never intended to keep them." Penelope tugged at Gerald's arm, looking uncomfortable. "Gerald, perhaps we should go back inside." "In a moment, darling." Gerald turned his attention to Colton, his eyes narrowing. "And who might you be?" "Just someone who knows better than to leave a lady in distress," Colton said evenly. There was no challenge in his voice, but no deference either. He simply stated a fact. "How noble," Gerald said with a sneer. "A drifter playing at being a gentleman. Violet, you can do better than this." Something flickered in Colton's eyes, something dangerous, but his voice remained calm. "Seems to me Miss Ansley could do better than both of us, but at least I'm honest about what I am." Gerald's jaw tightened. For a moment, Violet thought he might actually try to start a fight, but Penelope pulled at his arm again, more insistently this time, and after a long, tense moment, Gerald turned away. "Come, Penelope. Let's not waste any more time on this." He paused at the door, looking back at Violet with something like triumph in his eyes. "I hope you enjoy the rest of the social, Violet. I certainly will." When the door closed behind them, Violet felt her knees go weak. The brief surge of anger that had sustained her through the confrontation drained away, leaving her exhausted and shaking. "Steady," Colton said, moving to her side. "You want to sit down?" "I want to go home," Violet said. "But I can't. Not yet. If I leave now, if I run away, everyone will talk about it for weeks. They'll say I was too heartbroken to show my face. They'll say Gerald Whitman destroyed me. So what do you want to do?" Violet looked at the hall, at the warm light spilling from its windows, at the shapes of dancers moving past. She thought about Gerald inside, probably laughing with his fiancée, probably relieved that he'd been rid of her so easily. She thought about all those people inside, the ones who'd watched her cry, who were probably still talking about her. An idea formed, reckless, maybe foolish, but suddenly very appealing. "I want to go back inside," she said. "I want to walk in there with my head up. I want to dance. And I want everyone to see that Gerald Whitman didn't break me." Colton studied her face for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. "All right then, I'm not much of a dancer, but if you're willing to risk your toes, I'm willing to try." "You do that? Dance with me in there? After everything?" "Miss Ansley," Colton said, offering his arm. "It would be my honor." Violet took his arm, feeling the solid strength of it beneath her fingers. Together, they walked back to the hall. When they stepped through the door, conversations faltered and heads turned. Violet felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but this time she didn't cry. She lifted her chin and let Colton lead her onto the dance floor. The musicians were playing a waltz, a slower, more elegant dance than the reels and jigs that had filled most of the evening. Colton took Violet's hand in his other hand resting lightly on her waist, and they began to move. He'd said he wasn't much of a dancer, but that wasn't quite true. He was careful, maybe a bit stiff, but he knew the steps. He held her with a kind of old-fashioned courtesy, maintaining a proper distance, his movements sure and steady. And as they danced, Violet felt something shift inside her. Gerald had always danced with flash and style, spinning her elaborately, making sure everyone was watching. Dancing with him had felt like a performance, but dancing with Colton felt safe, real, like he was actually paying attention to her, not to the audience. "You're doing fine," Colton said quietly. "They're not talking about you crying anymore. Now they're just wondering who I am." "Are you always this honest?" Violet asked. "Usually gets me in trouble," Colton admitted, "but I found it's better than the alternative." Around them, other couples had returned to dancing, but Violet was aware of the glances, the whispers. Across the floor, she could see Gerald watching them, his expression dark. Penelope was trying to get his attention, but his eyes were fixed on Violet and Colton. "He's watching us," Violet murmured. "Let him watch," Colton said. "You're not dancing for him. You're dancing because you deserve to." The words settled into Violet's chest like a warm stone. She realized suddenly that she was actually enjoying herself, not in spite of the disaster with Gerald, but almost because of it. Because here, in the arms of a stranger who'd shown her more genuine kindness in 30 minutes than Gerald had shown in months, she felt like herself again. When the waltz ended, there was a smattering of applause. Colton stepped back, releasing her hand. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Ansley. You're a fine partner." "Thank you for saving me," Violet said softly. "Didn't save you," Colton replied. "You saved yourself. I just gave you an arm to lean on." Before Violet could respond, her father appeared at her elbow. Charles Ansley was a big man, weathered by years of ranch work, with iron-gray hair and a beard that had once been dark. His expression was hard to read. "Violet," he said gruffly, "I heard what happened with young Whitman. I'm sorry, honey." "Papa!" Violet felt tears threaten again, but she blinked them back. "It's all right. I'm all right." Charles looked at Colton, his eyes assessing. "You're the fellow who danced with my daughter?" "Yes, sir, Colton Chase." Colton offered his hand, and after a moment Charles shook it. "Charles Ansley. I own the AA Ranch about 5 miles north of town." He paused. "My daughter tells me you helped her through a difficult moment. I appreciate that." "Any decent man would have done the same, sir." "Maybe, but you're the one who did." Charles crossed his arms, still studying Colton. "You said your name was Chase? Are you kin to the Chase family up in Wyoming?" "No, sir. No family to speak of. I've been working cattle drives for the past 8 years, mostly between Texas and Montana. Thought I'd look for something more permanent. Heard Copper Creek was a growing town, might have opportunities." "Can you work cattle?" "Yes, sir. Grew up doing it. I can rope, brand, break horses if needed. I can fix fence, work leather, and I know enough carpentry to handle basic repairs." Charles nodded slowly. "I could use a good hand. Lost 2 men this winter. One went back east, the other decided to try his luck in the mines. If you're serious about looking for work, come by the ranch tomorrow morning. We'll see what you can do." Colton's expression didn't change much, but Violet saw something ease in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I'll be there at first light." "See that you are?" Charles turned to Violet, his expression softening. "You ready to go home, honey?" Violet glanced around the hall. The social was still in full swing, but the evening had lost its appeal. She nodded. "Yes, Papa. I'll bring the wagon around." Charles looked at Colton once more. "Chase, if you need a place to stay tonight, we've got a spare bunk in the ranch house. No sense paying for a room if you're coming out in the morning anyway." "That's generous of you, sir." "It's practical. Come on, then." As they walked out into the night, Violet felt the tension of the evening finally starting to drain away. Her father went to fetch the wagon, leaving her and Colton standing in the cool darkness. "You don't have to come with us," Violet said. "I'm sure there are rooms in town." "Your father made a kind offer," Colton replied. "And I appreciate it. Besides, I want to see what the AA looks like. If I'm going to work there, might as well get familiar with it." "You sound confident Papa will hire you." "I'm confident I can do the work. Whether he hires me or not is up to him." They fell silent, listening to the sounds of the social continuing inside. Music, laughter, the stamp of dancing feet. Violet thought about Gerald in there, probably relieved she'd left, probably already forgetting her. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "That thing you said earlier about knowing what it's like to hurt. What did you mean?" Colton was quiet for so long that Violet thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. I was engaged once, long time ago. She was a rancher's daughter in Texas, and I was a young cowhand who thought he could build something out of nothing. I worked 3 years to save enough money to buy land, to have something to offer her. He paused. When I finally had enough, when I was ready to marry her, I found out she'd been seeing someone else, the son of the ranch owner. He could give her security, a big house, a comfortable life. I couldn't compete with that. I'm sorry, Violet said softly. It was a long time ago, but I remember how it felt. That moment when you realized someone you loved didn't value you the same way, that the future you'd imagined was never real. He looked at her, his eyes serious in the darkness. You'll get through this, Miss Ansley. It hurts now, but you'll get through it. And someday you'll find someone who sees your worth, someone who'll choose you and keep choosing you. Before Violet could respond, her father returned with the wagon. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, with Charles handling the reins and Violet and Colton sitting in the back. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the mountain sky, and the air smelled of sage and pine. The AA ranch house was a sprawling structure of logs and stone, built to withstand harsh winters. There was a main house where Violet and her father lived, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a large barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Even in the darkness, lit only by starlight and the lanterns Charles carried, it was clear this was a successful operation. We've got about 3,000 head, Charles explained as they walked toward the house. Run them on open range mostly, but we're starting to fence some of the better pastures. We supply beef to Denver, some to the mining camps. It's good work, but it's hard work. I'm not afraid of hard work, sir. We'll see. Charles led them into the house, a comfortable space with a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and windows that looked out over the mountains. Violet, show Mr. Chase to the spare room. I'll bank the fire. The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chair, and a washstand. Violet lit the lamp on the bedside table and turned to Colton. Thank you, she said, for tonight, for everything. You already thanked me. I know, but I mean it. You didn't have to help me. You didn't have to dance with me. You didn't have to make me feel like I was worth something when I felt like nothing at all. Colton looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You are worth something, Miss Ansley. Don't let one fool convince you otherwise. After she'd said goodnight and closed the door, Violet went to her own room and sat on her bed, still wearing the lavender dress that was supposed to have been perfect for a proposal. She thought about Gerald, about the months she'd wasted imagining a future with him. She thought about the humiliation of tonight, the tears, the whispers. But mostly, she thought about Colton Chase, a stranger who'd stepped forward when no one else had, who'd offered comfort without expecting anything in return, who danced with her not to make a point, but simply because she'd needed someone to be kind. Tomorrow he would probably get the job. He'd become another ranch hand, someone she'd see occasionally around the property. Their paths might cross now and then, but tonight would fade into memory, an odd, painful, strangely tender moment that meant nothing in the larger scope of their lives. At least, that's what Violet thought as she finally changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed. She had no way of knowing that the cowboy sleeping in the spare room would become so much more than just another hired hand, that his quiet strength and steady presence would change everything about her life. But that knowledge would come later. For now, she was just a girl who'd cried at a social, who'd been rescued by a stranger, and who'd found the courage to walk back into that hall and dance. It was enough. It had to be enough. As sleep finally claimed her, Violet's last conscious thought was of Colton's words. Someday you'll find someone who sees your worth, someone who will choose you and keep choosing you. She didn't yet realize she'd already met him. Dawn broke over the AA ranch with the kind of crystalline clarity that only came in the high country spring. Violet woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of her father's voice in the yard below, already giving instructions to the hands. For a moment, still caught in that hazy space between sleep and waking, she forgot about the previous night. Then memory crashed back. Gerald's announcement, her tears, the stranger who danced with her. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. Colton Chase. He was here, somewhere in the house, and her father was going to test him this morning. She dressed hurriedly in her work clothes, a simple cotton dress, sturdy boots, her hair braided and pinned, and headed downstairs. The kitchen smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman whose husband had died in the mines 5 years ago, stood at the stove. She looked up as Violet entered, her weathered face creasing with concern. "You eat," she said firmly, pointing to the table where a plate was already set. "Your papa say you had bad night." "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen." Violet poured herself coffee, the familiar ritual steadying her nerves. "Is Mr. Chase already outside?" "He up before sun. Help your papa with morning feed without being asked." Mrs. Chen cracked eggs into the skillet with practiced efficiency. "Good worker, that one. Quiet. Respectful." Violet carried her coffee to the window. In the corral nearest the barn, she could see Colton working with one of the young horses, a buckskin gelding that had been giving the other hands trouble. Her father stood at the fence watching, along with Jack Morgan and Tom Reeves, the two remaining full-time hands. Even from this distance, Violet could tell something was different about the way Colton moved. Patient, confident, with none of the rough force some men used when breaking horses. She ate quickly, barely tasting Mrs. Chen's excellent breakfast, then grabbed her work apron and headed outside. There were chickens to feed, the kitchen garden to tend, a dozen small tasks that made up her morning routine, but she found herself drifting toward the corral, drawn by curiosity. "Easy now," Colton was saying, his voice low and steady. The buckskin snorted, ears flicking nervously, but didn't bolt. "Nobody's gonna hurt you. Just getting to know each other, that's all." "That horse threw Jimmy Peterson twice last week," Jack Morgan called out. He was a wiry man in his 40s, sun-weathered and skeptical of newcomers. "Nearly broke his arm the second time." "That's because Jimmy tried to force him," Colton replied, not taking his eyes off the horse. "You can't force trust. You have to earn it." Charles grunted, a sound that might have been approval. "How long you figure it'll take?" "However long it takes, sir. Might be an hour, might be a week. Depends on the horse." Colton took a slow step forward, hand extended, palm down. The buckskin whinnied and backed up, but Colton didn't chase. He just stood there, waiting, until the horse's curiosity overcame its fear and it stretched its neck forward to sniff his hand. Violet watched, transfixed. There was something almost meditative about the way Colton worked, a patience she'd rarely seen in the rough-and-tumble world of ranch hands. Most of the men she knew approached horses like they approached everything else, with bravado and force. But Colton seemed to understand that true strength sometimes meant holding back, giving space, letting the other creature come to you. "Morning, Miss Ansley," Tom Reeves said, touching his hat brim. He was younger than Jack, maybe 25, with red hair and an easy smile. "How you feeling after last night?" "I'm fine, Tom." Violet kept her voice light, though the question stung. Of course, everyone would know what had happened. By now, the story of Gerald's betrayal had probably spread through half the county. "Thank you for asking." "That Whitman fellow's a damn fool, if you'll pardon my language. Anyone with eyes could see you were too good for him." Before Violet could respond, Colton spoke up from inside the corral. "Mr. Ansley, would you mind if I tried something? I'd like to see how this gelding responds to weight." "Go ahead," Charles said. What followed was a masterclass in horsemanship. Colton spent another 20 minutes working with the buckskin, gradually introducing the saddle, letting the horse investigate it, rewarding calm behavior with pats and soft words. When he finally swung up into the saddle, the buckskin tensed but didn't buck. Instead, after a moment of stillness, it began to walk in a circle, responding to Colton's gentle guidance. "Well, I'll be damned," Jack muttered. Charles's expression remained neutral, but Violet saw the approval in her father's eyes. "All right, Chase, turn him out and come up to the house. We need to talk terms." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Charles laid out the job. "I can offer you $40 a month plus room and board. You'll bunk with Jack and Tom in the bunkhouse. Work starts at dawn, ends when the work's done. Sunday morning's off for church if you want it, but there's always chores that need doing. We drive cattle to Denver twice a year, which means weeks on the trail. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir," Colton said without hesitation. "I don't tolerate drinking on the job, fighting, or any kind of trouble. I run a clean operation here. You have a problem with anyone, you come to me. Understood?" "Understood." "One more thing." Charles leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharp. My daughter lives in this house. She's all the family I've got since my wife passed. I expect my men to treat her with respect. That means no inappropriate behavior, no unwanted attention, and absolutely no gossip about her personal business. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Colton met Charles's eyes steadily. I would never disrespect Miss Ansley or your household. You have my word on that. Something passed between the two men, an understanding perhaps, or a test successfully passed. Charles nodded. All right then, you're hired. Jack will show you to your bunk and get you set up with gear. We're moving cattle to the upper pasture today, so you'll get a chance to show me what you can really do. As Colton stood to leave, Violet caught his eye. He gave her a small nod, nothing more, but she felt oddly reassured by his presence. After he'd gone, Charles turned to his daughter. You all right with this, honey? Him being here? Why wouldn't I be? Because he was there last night. Because every time you see him, you might remember... Charles trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. Papa, I'm grateful he was there. He helped me when I needed it, and he didn't make me feel like a charity case. Besides, if you're hiring him, it's because he's a good worker, not because of what happened at the social. Charles studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. He is a good worker. Best I've seen in a while, truth be told. There's something solid about him, something steady. He paused. But if having him around bothers you, if it makes things harder, you tell me. I'll find him work elsewhere. It doesn't bother me, Violet said, and realized it was true. If anything, Colton's presence felt safe, like having an anchor in the storm that had become her life. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Colton proved himself indispensable almost immediately. He was up before dawn every morning, worked until after dark, and never complained. He had a gift with difficult horses, a patient hand with mending fence, and a knack for solving problems that had stumped the other hands. Within a week, even Jack Morgan, who'd been skeptical of the newcomer, admitted that Colton Chase knew his business. Violet saw him often in the course of her own work. She'd bring lunch out to the men when they were working distant pastures, or help with the evening milking, or tend to injured animals in the barn. Colton was always polite, always respectful, keeping that careful distance her father had insisted upon. But sometimes she'd catch him watching her with those thoughtful blue-gray eyes, and she'd wonder what he was thinking. They rarely spoke beyond basic pleasantries. Good morning, Miss Ansley. Good evening, Mr. Chase. The weather's turning. Yes, I believe we'll have rain. Simple exchanges that meant nothing and everything. But Violet found herself noticing things about him. The way he gentle-talked skittish animals. How he always helped Mrs. Chen carry heavy supplies without being asked. The fact that he spent his Sunday afternoons reading, actual books, not just newspapers, sitting under the cottonwood tree near the bunkhouse. The careful way he cleaned and maintained his gear, treating his tools with the respect of a man who'd learned that good equipment might save your life someday. She noticed, too, that he never went into town on Saturday nights like Jack and Tom did. Never drank, never gambled, never spoke about women or courting or any of the things the other hands talked about. He was friendly enough with the other men, but there was a wall around him, a boundary he didn't let anyone cross. 2 weeks after the social, Mary Catherine and Louisa came to visit. They brought fabric for a new dress and an abundance of sympathy, settling into the parlor with tea and determined to dissect every detail of what they called the Gerald situation. I heard his fiancée is staying at the hotel, Mary Catherine said, her eyes bright with gossip. Apparently she's horrified by how rustic Copper Creek is compared to Boston. She's been complaining about everything from the food to the accommodations. Good, Louisa said fiercely. She deserves to be miserable. They both do. I don't care about Gerald anymore, Violet said, and was surprised to find it mostly true. Oh, there was still hurt. Betrayal wasn't something you got over in 2 weeks, but the sharp edge of it had dulled. He made his choice. Let him live with it. Very mature of you, Mary Catherine said approvingly. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. But what we really want to know about is the mysterious cowboy who danced with you, the one who's now working here. Mr. Chase is a ranch hand, that's all. That's all? Louisa raised her eyebrows. Vi, the man waltzed you around that dance floor like you were the only person in the room. Half the women there were swooning. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not. Even Mrs. Henderson said he cut quite a figure, and you should have seen Gerald's face when you danced. I thought he was going to have an apoplexy. Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Chase was being kind. He saw I was upset, and he helped me. It didn't mean anything beyond that. Maybe not to him, Mary Catherine said thoughtfully. But what about to you? The question caught Violet off guard. What did Colton Chase mean to her? He was a stranger who'd shown her kindness, a skilled worker her father respected, a quiet presence on the ranch. But more than that? She didn't know. Didn't want to think about it too deeply, not with her heart still bruised from Gerald's betrayal. He's a good man, she said finally, but I'm not interested in courting anyone right now. I need time to figure out who I am without someone else defining me. Her friends seemed to accept this, and the conversation moved on to other topics. But after they'd left, Violet found herself thinking about Colton more than she wanted to admit, about his careful courtesy and quiet strength, about the way he'd held her while they danced, gentle and respectful, about his story of lost love and how it had shaped him. That evening, she carried supper out to the men who were repairing fence in the eastern pasture. It was a beautiful spring night, warm and golden, with wildflowers blooming across the meadows. Jack and Tom were their usual jovial selves, joking and telling stories, but Colton worked apart from them, focused on splicing wire with practiced precision. "Mr. Chase," Violet called, "Mrs. Chen sent stew. You should eat before it gets cold." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Thank you, Miss Ansley. That's very kind." She'd brought enough for all three men, along with fresh bread and canteens of water. As they ate, Jack launched into a story about a cattle drive he'd been on years ago, when a stampede had scattered the herd across 20 miles of prairie. Tom added his own embellishments, and even Violet found herself laughing at their exaggerated descriptions. But Colton remained quiet, eating methodically, his gaze distant. When the others went back to work, he lingered for a moment, helping Violet pack the empty dishes into her basket. "Your friends came to visit today," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes, Mary Catherine and Louisa. They wanted to make sure I was all right." "Are you? All right, I mean?" Violet considered the question seriously. "I'm getting there. It still hurts, but not as much as it did. Mostly I just feel foolish for not seeing what Gerald really was." "You're not foolish. He deceived you. That's on him, not you." "Everyone keeps saying that. Why doesn't it feel true?" Colton set down the last dish and straightened, looking at her directly. "So, because when someone betrays your trust, it makes you question your own judgment, makes you wonder if you can trust yourself to see people clearly. But Miss Ansley, the fact that you trusted him says something good about you, not something bad. It means you're the kind of person who believes in people, who sees the best in them. That's not a weakness. It's a strength, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." The words settled into Violet's chest, warm and steady. "Is that how you felt? After your fiancé chose someone else?" "For a long time, yes. I thought I'd been a fool, that I'd wasted 3 years working toward something that was never real. But eventually I realized that I'd loved honestly, worked honestly, and offered everything I had. The fact that it wasn't enough for her didn't diminish the value of what I'd offered. It just meant we weren't meant to be together." "Do you still love her?" The question was too personal, too intimate for their careful acquaintance. Violet knew it even as the words left her mouth. But Colton didn't seem offended. He just thought about it, his expression contemplative. "No," he said finally. "What I loved was the idea of her, the future I thought we'd have. But I didn't really know her, not the way you should know someone you're planning to marry. If I had, I might have seen that we wanted different things, valued different things." He paused. "I think that's what you're discovering about Gerald, too. That the man you thought you loved wasn't real." "Then how do you ever trust your own feelings?" Violet asked, her voice small. "How do you know if what you feel is real or just another illusion?" "I don't know that you ever know for certain. But I think real love, the lasting kind, it's built on honesty, on seeing someone clearly, all their flaws and strengths, and choosing them anyway. It's built on respect and partnership, not just romance and pretty words." He picked up the basket and handed it to her, careful not to let their fingers touch. When you find that, Miss Ansley, you'll know, because it'll feel different than what you had with Gerald. It'll feel solid, like bedrock instead of sand. Before Violet could respond, Jack called out that they needed Colton's help with a stubborn post. The moment broke, and Colton gave her a brief nod before heading back to work. Violet walked back to the house slowly, his words echoing in her mind. That night, lying in bed and listening to the spring peepers singing in the creek, she thought about honesty and bedrock and partnerships. She thought about Gerald's smooth compliments and elaborate courtship, how it had all been performance with no substance beneath. And she thought about Colton Chase, who spoke plainly and worked hard and seemed utterly incapable of pretense. She was still thinking about him when sleep finally came. The following Saturday, Violet went into town with Mrs. Chen to buy supplies. It was unavoidable. The ranch needed things, and she couldn't hide forever. She held her head high as she walked down Main Street, bracing herself for stares and whispers. But to her surprise, what she got was mostly support. "Violet," Mrs. Henderson called from the mercantile. "Come in, dear. I've been saving the new fabric samples to show you." At the post office, Mr. Jameson tipped his hat and said Gerald Whitman was a damned fool who didn't deserve her. Even stern Mrs. Pritchard from the church said she'd always thought Gerald was too smooth for his own good, and Violet was well rid of him. The gossip, it seemed, had turned. Instead of pitying the jilted girl, Copper Creek had decided to disapprove of the man who'd done the jilting. It was a small kindness, but Violet was grateful for it. She was leaving the general store, arms full of packages, when she nearly collided with Gerald himself. He was alone, no sign of Penelope, and he looked tired, his usual polish somewhat dimmed. "Violet," he said, seeming genuinely surprised. "I was hoping I might run into you. Could we talk?" "I don't think we have anything to say to each other, Gerald." "Please, just 5 minutes." Against her better judgment, Violet agreed. They walked to the small park near the church, sitting on a bench beneath a spreading elm. Gerald was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. "What I did at the social, announcing my engagement like that, it was cruel. You deserved better." "Yes, I did." Penelope's father owns 3 banks in Boston. Marrying her means security, opportunity, a chance to build something significant. I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd see it was just business. Violet stared at him, genuinely shocked. "Business? Gerald, you courted me for months. You made me believe you cared about me. And all along it was just business?" "That's not what I meant. I do care about you, Violet. You're intelligent, capable, beautiful. But caring about someone isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to be practical." "So you chose money over honesty, over basic decency." Gerald's jaw tightened. "I chose a secure future, and frankly, I expected you to move on more quickly. Instead, you're still here, working on your father's ranch, dancing with drifters. Don't you want more than this?" "I want honesty," Violet said, her voice hard. "I want respect. I want someone who sees me as more than a business decision or a consolation prize. And if that means I stay on my father's ranch for the rest of my life, then that's what I'll do. Because it's better than spending my life with someone who sees me as practical." She stood, gathering her packages. Gerald grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her. "That cowboy," he said, his voice low. "Chase. There's talk about him in town, about his past. I don't care about gossip." "You should. People say he killed a man in Texas, that he's running from something. That's who you're defending, Violet, a man with blood on his hands." Violet pulled her arm free, her heart pounding. "Whatever Mr. Chase's past might be, it's his business, not yours and not mine, unless he chooses to share it." She took a step back. "Goodbye, Gerald. I hope you and Miss Hartford will be very happy together." She walked away without looking back, but Gerald's words haunted her. Killed a man, running from something. Was it true? And if it was, what did it mean? That evening she couldn't help watching Colton more carefully. He was helping Tom repair a section of the barn roof, his movements sure and steady. He didn't look like a killer. But then, what did a killer look like? Not all violence came with warning labels. She thought about asking her father, but Charles would either know already or would confront Colton directly. and Violet wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, she decided to wait, to watch, to see if the man she'd been observing for 2 weeks matched the dark reputation Gerald had hinted at. The answer came 3 days later, in a way she never expected. A storm had been building all afternoon, dark clouds piling up against the mountains. By evening, lightning was flickering through the peaks and thunder rolled across the valley. The men secured the animals and battened down the loose equipment, preparing for the worst. The storm hit with sudden violence. Sheets of rain, wind that tore at the buildings, hail that drummed against the roof like bullets. Violet and Mrs. Chen moved through the house, closing shutters and securing doors, while Charles went to check on the barn. Then they heard shouting from outside. Violet ran to the window and saw Jack and Tom running toward the bunkhouse, pointing toward the eastern pasture. Through the rain, she could just make out a dark shape, one of the horses, loose and panicking in the storm. Without thinking, she grabbed her father's oilskin coat and ran outside. The rain hit her like a wall, instantly soaking through her clothes. She could see Charles and Jack trying to corner the terrified horse. But every time they got close, lightning would flash and the animal would bolt. Then she saw Colton. He was moving calmly through the chaos, approaching the horse from an angle, speaking words she couldn't hear over the storm. The horse reared, its eyes rolling white, and for a moment Violet thought Colton would be trampled. But he stood his ground, hands out, voice steady, until the horse's panic began to subside. "That's it," he was saying when Violet got close enough to hear. "Easy now. I've got you. You're safe." Slowly, incredibly, the horse calmed. Colton got a rope around its neck and led it toward the barn, moving through the wind and rain as if they were nothing but mild inconvenience. Violet followed, drawn by something she couldn't name. Inside the barn, out of the storm's fury, Colton dried the horse and checked it for injuries. His hands were gentle, thorough, professional. Violet watched from the doorway, illuminated by the lantern light, and saw not a killer, but a healer, a man who cared for frightened creatures with infinite patience. "Mr. Chase," she said quietly. He looked up, surprised to see her there. "Miss Ansley, you shouldn't be out in this weather." "Neither should you, but here we are." She came closer, noticing for the first time that he was bleeding, a deep cut across his forearm where the horse must have caught him. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Come up to the house. I'll clean it properly." "Miss Ansley, please." The word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "You just risked your life for that horse. The least you can do is let me tend your wound." They walked through the rain to the main house, not speaking. In the kitchen, Mrs. Chen took one look at Colton's arm and immediately began heating water and gathering clean cloths. Violet pulled out her mother's old medical kit, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender and carbolic acid. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a chair at the kitchen table. Colton sat, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Violet carefully cleaned the wound, her fingers gentle but efficient. It was deep but clean, not likely to become infected if properly cared for. "This will hurt," she warned, reaching for the bottle of whiskey they kept for medicinal purposes. "I can handle it." She poured the whiskey over the cut, and Colton tensed but didn't make a sound. His jaw tightened, that was all. Violet found herself oddly moved by his quiet stoicism. "You were brave out there," she said as she began to wrap the wound with clean bandages. "That horse could have killed you." She was just scared. Fear makes all of us do things we wouldn't normally do. "Is that what happened in Texas?" The question was out before Violet could stop it. When the thing Gerald mentioned happened," Colton went very still. "What did Gerald say?" "That you killed a man, that you're running from your past." For a long moment, Colton didn't respond. Then he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I suppose I should have known the story would follow me. It always does." "Is it true?" "Yes." He looked up at her, his eyes clear and direct. "I killed a man in Texas. But it wasn't murder, Miss Ansley. It was self-defense." Violet tied off the bandage with shaking fingers, then sat down across from him. "Tell me what happened, please." Colton was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then slowly, he began to speak. "After my engagement ended, I drifted for a while. Worked various ranches, never staying long. Eventually, I ended up in a town called Redemption, about 50 miles west of San Antonio. I was working for a cattleman named Dalton Reeves, no relation to Tom, far as I know. One Saturday night, I was in town buying supplies. Stopped at the saloon for a drink before heading back. He paused, his expression distant, remembering. There was a card game going on, 5 men, including the town marshal's brother, a fellow named Pike Garrett. Pike was drunk and losing badly. He accused one of the other players, a Mexican ranch hand named Mateo, of cheating. Things got heated. Pike pulled a gun. Violet's breath caught. Mateo wasn't armed. Pike was going to shoot him dead over a card game and a bruised ego, so I stepped in, tried to talk Pike down, get him to put the gun away, but he was too drunk, too angry. He turned the gun on me instead. Colton's voice was flat, carefully controlled. I drew faster. My bullet hit him in the chest. He died before the doctor could arrive. But it was self-defense, Violet said. Surely people saw. They saw. The marshal knew it was justified. So did everyone else in that saloon. But Pike Garrett had family, brothers, cousins, all of them meaner than rattlesnakes. They swore they'd kill me for what I'd done, justified or not. The marshal suggested I might want to leave town before things got ugly. He met Violet's eyes. So I did. I've been moving ever since, working where I can, trying to stay ahead of anyone who might want revenge for a killing that wasn't murder. That's why you came to Colorado. That's why I came to Copper Creek. It's far enough from Texas that I hope the story wouldn't follow, but stories always do, especially the dark ones. He stood, flexing his bandaged arm. Thank you for tending this, Miss Ansley, and thank you for listening. I understand if you want your father to let me go. I won't hold it against you. Why would I want that? Because I'm exactly what Gerald said. A man with blood on his hands. A drifter with a violent past. Not the kind of person respectable folk want around their daughters. Violet stood too, her chin lifting. You saved a man's life, Mr. Chase. You protected someone who couldn't protect himself, and you paid the price for it. That doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you decent. You're very kind, but I'm not being kind. I'm being honest. She moved closer, looking up at him. In the 2 weeks you've been here, I've watched you gentle, difficult horses, help Mrs. Chen without being asked, work harder than anyone else, and risk your life in a storm to save a frightened animal. Those are the actions of a good man, not a killer. Whatever happened in Texas, you did what you had to do. And anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about. Something shifted in Colton's expression. Surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that Violet couldn't quite name. Thank you, he said quietly. That means more than you know. Will you tell my father? About Texas? I should. He deserves to know who he's hired. Then we'll tell him together, Violet said. Tomorrow, after breakfast. And I'll make sure he understands what really happened. That night, as the storm raged outside and rain drummed against the windows, Violet lay awake thinking about Colton Chase, about his quiet strength and painful honesty, about the way he'd saved a man in Texas and paid for that kindness with exile, about how he'd saved her too, in a different way, on a night when her world had collapsed. She thought about Gerald's smooth lies and careful manipulations, and about Colton's rough truth and simple decency. She thought about bedrock and sand, about substance and performance. And somewhere in the darkness, listening to the storm, Violet Ansley realized that her feelings had shifted, that the cowboy who danced with her at the social had become something more than just a hired hand or a kind stranger. He'd become someone she respected, someone she admired, someone whose presence made her feel safe and seen in ways she'd never felt with Gerald. It wasn't love. Not yet, perhaps not ever. She was still too hurt, too wary, to think about love. But it was something, the beginning of something. A seed planted in rich soil, waiting to see if it would grow. In the bunkhouse across the yard, Colton lay awake too, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Violet's words. You did what you had to do. No one had said that to him before. No one had looked past the killing to see the man behind it, the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. He told himself he was just passing through Copper Creek, that he'd work here a season or two and then move on before his past caught up with him. But now, wrapped in clean bandages that smelled faintly of lavender, with rain drumming on the roof and wind howling around the eaves, Colton found himself hoping he could stay. Not because of the job, though it was good work. Not because of the pay, though it was fair, but because of the woman in the main house, the one who'd looked at his darkest moment and seen not a killer but a protector. The one whose tears he'd dried at a social, whose respect he'd earned through honesty, whose trust he'd been given despite everything. Tomorrow he'd tell her father the truth and face whatever consequences came. He owed Charles Ansley that much. But tonight, just for tonight, Colton let himself imagine staying. Let himself imagine building something here, putting down roots, becoming part of a community instead of just passing through. Let himself imagine, though he barely dared admit it, what it might be like to earn not just Violet's respect but her affection, her trust, maybe, someday, her love. The storm raged on, but inside the buildings of the AA Ranch, in two separate rooms, two people lay awake thinking about honesty and trust and the fragile beginning of something that might, given time and patience and care, grow into something neither of them expected but both of them needed. Outside, the rain washed the world clean, preparing the ground for whatever would grow in the spring. Morning came soft and clean, the storm having passed in the night. Violet woke early, her stomach tight with anticipation. Today they would tell her father about Texas, about Pike Garrett, about the violence that had driven Colton west. She dressed carefully, braided her hair, and went downstairs to find Mrs. Chen already preparing breakfast. "Big day," Mrs. Chen said, glancing at Violet's face. The housekeeper had an uncanny ability to read people, to sense when something important was about to happen. "Yes," Violet admitted. "I think it might be." Charles came in from the morning chores, shaking water from his hat. The world outside sparkled with rain-washed clarity, every surface gleaming. "Storm did some damage to the east fence," he announced. "We'll need to ride out after breakfast and assess it." He paused, noticing Violet's expression. "Something on your mind, honey?" "Papa, I need to talk to you. Mr. Chase and I both do. It's important." Charles's eyebrows rose, but he simply nodded. "All right, after we eat." Colton arrived a few minutes later, his bandaged arm visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. He'd clearly been working already despite the injury, his boots muddy from the wet ground. When his eyes met Violet's across the kitchen, she saw determination there, and something else, gratitude, perhaps, that he wouldn't have to face this alone. They ate in relative silence, the weight of the coming conversation hanging over them. When Mrs. Chen cleared the plates, Charles poured himself another cup of coffee and settled back in his chair. "All right," he said. "What's this about?" Violet looked at Colton, who took a deep breath and began. He told the story exactly as he'd told Violet, plainly, without embellishment or excuse. Pike Garrett's drunken rage, Mateo's danger, the split-second choice that had ended in death. Charles listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable. When Colton finished, silence filled the kitchen. Violet's heart pounded as she watched her father trying to gauge his reaction. Finally, Charles spoke. "You could have kept this quiet. Could have let me find out some other way, or never told me at all." "I could have," Colton agreed. "But you deserve to know who's working for you. And Miss Ansley deserves to know that I'm not hiding anything from her family." "Violet already knew?" "I told her last night after she tended my arm. She was the one who said we should tell you together." Charles looked at his daughter, something like approval in his eyes. Then he turned back to Colton. "This man you killed, was he armed when you shot him?" "Yes, sir. He had his gun drawn and aimed at me." "And the marshal cleared you of any wrongdoing?" "He did. Said it was clear self-defense, but Pike's family didn't see it that way. They wanted blood for blood regardless of the circumstances." "So you ran." "I left before things could get worse, before anyone else got hurt." Charles was quiet for another long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I've known men who've killed," he said finally. "Some of them were murderers, mean, violent men who took pleasure in it. But some of them were just men who found themselves in impossible situations, who did what they had to do to survive or protect others. He looked directly at Colton. Which kind are you? The second kind, sir, I hope. I believe you, Charles said. More than that, I've watched you work for 2 weeks. I've seen how you handle the animals, how you treat people, how you carry yourself. Whatever happened in Texas, it doesn't define who you are now. He paused. But I need your word on something. Anything, sir. If this trouble follows you here, if these Garrett brothers come looking, you tell me immediately. I won't have violence on my land if it can be avoided. But if it can't be avoided, I won't leave you to face it alone. You're part of this ranch now, and we protect our own. Something shifted in Colton's expression, a tightness around his eyes easing, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Thank you, sir. I give you my word. Good. Now get that fence repaired before it gets any worse. And take Jack with you. He knows that section best. As Colton stood to leave, Violet felt a rush of relief so strong it made her lightheaded. Her father had understood, had seen past the violence to the man beneath just as she had. It felt like validation, like confirmation that her instincts about Colton Chase had been right all along. The days that followed were busy with storm repairs and the normal work of running a ranch. Violet found herself watching Colton more openly now, no longer trying to hide her interest. She brought lunch to wherever he was working, lingered to help with tasks that didn't strictly need her assistance, invented reasons to be near him. And Colton, for his part, seemed to relax around her. His careful formality softened into something warmer, more natural. They talked as they worked, about books, about weather, about the ranch and the mountains, and the way the light changed as summer approached. You read a lot, Violet observed one afternoon as they mended tack in the barn. She'd noticed the stack of books beside his bunk, saw him reading during every spare moment. It's how I educated myself, Colton said, his hand steady as he stitched leather. Never had much formal schooling. My father died when I was 10, and I went to work right after. But I found that books could teach me things no school ever could. What do you like to read? Everything. History, philosophy, novels. I like learning how other people think, how they see the world. He glanced at her. What about you? My mother taught me to read when I was young. She loved poetry, Wordsworth, Tennyson, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. After she died, I kept her books. Sometimes I read them and I can almost hear her voice. That must be a comfort. It is, but it's also painful, remembering what we lost. Colton set down his work and looked at her directly. Loss is always painful, but I think the love that causes the pain is worth it. Better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, as the saying goes. Do you really believe that? Violet asked softly. After what happened with your fiancé? I do. Because even though it ended badly, those 3 years taught me what I wanted in life. They taught me about work and dedication and building toward something. Those lessons stayed with me even after she left. The pain faded, but the growth remained. Violet thought about Gerald, about the months of courtship that had ended in humiliation. Was there growth in that pain? Had she learned something valuable, or had it just been wasted time? I'm still trying to find the lesson in what happened with Gerald, she admitted. Mostly I just feel foolish. The lesson, Colton said carefully, is that you're strong enough to survive betrayal. That you can cry in front of a whole town and still walk back in with your head up. That's not foolishness, Miss Ansley. That's courage. Before Violet could respond, Tom came running into the barn, his face flushed with exertion and alarm. Fire! He shouted. There's a fire in the foothills, west of the Brennan place. It's spreading fast with this dry wind. They're calling all hands to fight it. The peaceful afternoon shattered. Charles appeared from the house, already shouting orders. Colton, Jack, Tom, saddle up. Bring shovels, axes, wet blankets. Violet, you and Mrs. Chen secure the homestead. If the wind shifts, that fire could come this way. Within minutes, the men were mounted and riding west, joining the stream of ranchers and townspeople heading toward the growing smoke plume. Violet watched them go, her heart tight with fear. Wildfires were a constant danger in the dry Colorado summer, and this one looked bad already. The next hours were a blur of activity. Violet and Mrs. Chen moved all the animals to the nearest creek, filled every available container with water, soaked blankets, and hung them over the windows. The sky darkened with smoke, turning the afternoon light an eerie orange. Ash began to fall like black snow, coating everything with a fine gray powder. By evening, the wind had shifted, pushing the fire north and away from the AA. But Violet could see the glow on the horizon, could smell the acrid smoke that made her eyes water and her throat burn. The men still hadn't returned. Night fell, and still no word. Violet paced the porch, straining to see through the smoke-hazed darkness. Mrs. Chen brought her tea that went cold in her hands. Every sound made her jump, hoping to hear hoofbeats announcing their return. It was nearly midnight when she finally heard horses approaching. She ran to meet them, lantern held high. Charles came first, his face black with soot, his clothes singed. Jack and Tom followed, equally exhausted. But no Colton. "Papa, where's Mr. Chase?" Charles swung down from his horse, moving like a man twice his age. "He stayed. There's a family trapped. The Hallorans, they've got a place up in the canyon. Fire cut them off from the main road. Colton and a few others stayed to try to get them out." "But that's—" Violet couldn't finish the sentence. It was suicide. The fire was massive, uncontrollable. Anyone who stayed faced almost certain death. "I know," Charles said grimly, "but there's a child. A little girl, maybe 5 years old. Colton wouldn't leave them." Of course he wouldn't. Violet thought of Pike Garrett, of Colton stepping between a gun and an unarmed man. Of course he would risk his life for strangers. That was who he was. Someone who couldn't walk away when others needed help, regardless of the cost to himself. The night stretched endlessly. Violet refused to go to bed, standing vigil on the porch as the fire raged in the distance. Charles sat beside her, too worried to sleep. They didn't speak much. There was nothing to say that would make the waiting easier. Dawn came gray and smoke-choked. The fire still burned, though the wind had died down, and still no sign of Colton. "I should ride out," Charles said, standing stiffly. "See if there's news. I'm coming with you." "Violet?" "I'm coming, Papa." They rode toward the fire line, joining the exhausted men and women who'd been fighting all night. The devastation was staggering. Hundreds of acres burned black, trees reduced to skeletal fingers of charcoal, the earth scorched and lifeless. They found the fire boss, a grizzled rancher named Ed Brennan, coordinating the remaining efforts. "The Hallorans?" Charles asked without preamble. Ed's face was grim. "Got them out about an hour ago. Chase and 2 others, Mike Sullivan and young Billy Wright. They created a fire break, then led the family through when the flames died back enough. Damn miracle, if you ask me." "Where are they now?" "Sullivan and Wright are over at the medical tent. Some burns, but nothing life-threatening. Chase—" Ed paused, his expression complicated. "He went back in, said he heard someone calling for help. We tried to stop him, but he was already moving before anyone could grab him." Violet's world tilted. "He went back in? Into the fire?" "There's a child," Ed said. "A little boy from one of the mining families got separated from his parents in the evacuation. Chase heard him crying and just went. That was 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes. 20 minutes in a raging wildfire. No one could survive that. Violet felt her legs go weak, felt her father's hand grip her arm to steady her. "Where?" Charles demanded. "Where did he go in?" Ed pointed to a section of forest still burning, flames leaping 50 feet into the air, near the old mining road. "But Charles, I can't let you go after him. We've already lost—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Violet heard it anyway. "We've already lost him." "No," she whispered. Then louder, "No, he can't be—" A shout went up from the fire line. Men were pointing, running toward the edge of the burn zone. Through the smoke, a figure emerged, tall, moving slowly, carrying something in his arms. Colton. Violet ran before she knew she was moving, her father close behind. Colton staggered as he cleared the fire line, and 2 men rushed forward to support him. In his arms was a small boy, maybe 7 years old, unconscious but alive. "Get the doctor!" someone shouted. Colton lowered the boy carefully to the ground, then collapsed beside him. His clothes were burned through in places. His face was black with soot and blood, and his hands, God, his hands were raw and blistered, the bandage from the horse wound burned away. But he was alive. The doctor rushed over, checking the boy first. After a tense moment, he nodded. He's alive. Smoke inhalation, but he'll recover. Then he turned to Colton. Let me see those hands. The boy first, Colton rasped, his voice barely audible. The boy's stable. Let me see your hands. Violet knelt beside Colton as the doctor began examining his injuries. There were burns along his arms and back where embers had landed, a deep gash on his forehead where something had struck him, and his hands were badly burned from moving burning debris. But he was alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. You fool, she said, tears streaming down her face. You absolute fool! Colton managed a weak smile. Found him, under a fallen tree. Couldn't leave him. You could have died. But I didn't. He winced as the doctor probed a particularly bad burn. Is the Halloran girl all right? She's fine. They're all fine because of you. Not just me. Sullivan and Wright were smart enough not to go back into a burning forest, Violet said fiercely. What were you thinking? I was thinking about a little boy who was probably terrified and hurt. I was thinking I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to help him. Colton looked at her directly, his eyes clear despite the pain he must be feeling. I'd do it again, Miss Ansley, even knowing the cost. The doctor finished his initial examination and stood. We need to get him back to town, get these burns properly treated. He's lucky. Could have been much worse, but those hands are going to need careful tending for the next few weeks. Take him to our place, Charles said. We've got room, and Violet knows nursing. He can recover at the AA. Papa, are you sure? Violet asked, though her heart leaped at the suggestion. He risked his life for strangers. The least we can do is make sure he heals properly. Charles looked down at Colton with something like respect. Besides, I told him we protect our own. Time to prove it. They transported Colton back to the ranch in a wagon, cushioned with blankets but still jostling over the rough roads. Every bump made him tense with pain, though he never cried out. Violet rode beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, offering what comfort she could. At the house, they settled him in the spare room, the same room he'd slept in that first night after the social. Mrs. Chen immediately took charge, boiling water, preparing poultices, gathering clean bandages. The doctor stayed for several hours, cleaning and dressing the burns, checking for signs of infection, leaving careful instructions. He'll need round-the-clock care for the next few days, the doctor said as he prepared to leave. Those hands especially, the burns go deep. He won't be able to do much for himself. I'll take care of him, Violet said. Her father raised an eyebrow but didn't object. I'll check the stock, he said. You call if you need anything. And so began the longest and strangest week of Violet's life. Colton, always so self-sufficient and strong, was reduced to helplessness by his injuries. His hands were wrapped in thick bandages that made it impossible for him to hold things, eat, or tend to himself. Violet became his hands, feeding him broth and bread, helping him drink water, changing his bandages twice daily as the doctor had instructed. At first, Colton was deeply uncomfortable with the situation. This isn't proper, he protested when Violet brought his breakfast the first morning. You shouldn't have to do this. Mrs. Chen has enough to manage with the house and cooking. Papa needs to run the ranch with 2 men short. That leaves me. Violet sat beside the bed and lifted a spoonful of broth. Now stop being stubborn and eat. I can feed myself. With what? Your elbows. She gestured to his bandaged hands. You can barely grip a cup, so either I feed you or you starve. Your choice. Colton sighed but accepted the spoonful. This is humiliating. You saved 2 children from a fire. I hardly think accepting help while you heal from doing something heroic is humiliating. I'm not a hero. The Hallorans might disagree. And that little boy's parents, and everyone else whose homes you helped save. Violet offered another spoonful. You need to accept the fact that you did something remarkable, Mr. Chase, and that people are grateful. Over the days that followed, a strange intimacy developed between them. Violet spent hours in that small room, tending Colton's wounds, bringing his meals, reading to him when he grew restless. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, the formal barriers that had existed between them, the careful distance they'd maintained gradually dissolved. Tell me about your mother, Colton said one afternoon as Violet changed his bandages. The burns were healing, the angry red fading to pink, but they were still painful. She was kind, Violet said, her hands gentle as she unwrapped the old bandages. Patient. She could see the good in everyone, even when it wasn't obvious. Papa says I take after her in that way. Is that why you gave Gerald a chance? Maybe. Or maybe I was just naive. Violet cleaned the burns carefully, noting with satisfaction that there was no sign of infection. She would have liked you, I think. Why do you say that? Because you're genuine. She valued authenticity above almost everything else. She used to say that a person's true character showed in how they treated those who couldn't do anything for them. Violet began wrapping fresh bandages. You went into a fire for a child who'd never be able to repay you. That would have impressed her. I didn't do it for recognition. I know, that's what makes it impressive. Colton was quiet as she finished bandaging his hands. Then, softly, he said, Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. I miss her every day. I'm sure she'd be proud of the woman you've become. The words were simple, but they hit Violet with unexpected force. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. How can you know that? Because you're strong and kind and brave. Because you see the good in people even when they've given you reason not to. Because you're helping me when you could have walked away, when plenty of people would have. Colton looked at her with those clear blue-gray eyes. Any mother would be proud of that. Violet had to look away, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. You should rest, she managed. The doctor said sleep is important for healing. As she started to leave, Colton said, Miss Ansley? Yes? Thank you. Not just for the nursing, for everything. For believing in me when others didn't. For seeing past the violence in my past to who I am now. He trailed off, seeming to search for words. For making me feel like I belong somewhere. Violet's throat tightened. You do belong here, Mr. Chase. I hope you'll stay. That night, lying in her own bed, Violet acknowledged what she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She cared about Colton Chase, deeply. Not just as an employee of her father's ranch, not just as a kind stranger who had helped her through humiliation, but as a man, a good, brave, honorable man who made her feel safe and seen and valued. It wasn't the giddy infatuation she'd felt for Gerald, all romance and pretty words. This was something quieter but deeper, something that felt like bedrock instead of sand. By the end of the week, Colton was well enough to move around, though his hands were still bandaged and weak. The doctor had said it would be several more weeks before he could do heavy work, but Colton insisted on doing what he could. He helped Mrs. Chen in the garden, worked one-handed on small repairs, spent time with the horses using voice and presence since he couldn't use his hands. Charles watched this with approval. Man who won't stop working even when he's injured. That's a man you can count on. The fire had burned itself out after 5 days, leaving a massive scar across the foothills. 3 homes had been lost, dozens of acres of forest destroyed. But thanks to the efforts of men like Colton, the death toll was 0. The town held a special service to give thanks, and Colton was publicly recognized for his bravery along with Sullivan and Wright. He accepted the recognition with quiet grace, deflecting attention to the other firefighters, insisting he'd only done what anyone would have done. But Violet saw the way people looked at him afterward, with respect, with gratitude, with the kind of regard reserved for true heroes. The stranger who'd arrived in Copper Creek just weeks ago had become someone the community valued and trusted. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the fire, Colton found Violet sitting on the porch watching the sunset. His hands were less heavily bandaged now, and he could manage most tasks, though his movements were still stiff and careful. Mind if I join you? He asked. Please do. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky fade from gold to rose to purple. The mountains stood dark against the fading light, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. I've been thinking, Colton said finally, about what happens when my hands heal. When I can go back to full work. Violet's heart sank. You're planning to leave? No. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. I'm planning to stay. If your father will have me, if... He paused, seeming to gather courage. "If you want me to stay." Why would what I want matter? Because it does. Because somewhere between that dance at the social and now, your opinion became the one that mattered most to me. He flexed his bandaged hands carefully. "I told you once that you'd find someone who sees your worth, who'll choose you and keep choosing you. I didn't expect that person to be me. I didn't think I had the right to hope for that. And now? Now I'm hoping anyway. Not for courtship. I know it's too soon for that, after Gerald. But for friendship. For the chance to keep being part of your life, part of this place. For permission to stay and see what might grow between us if we give it time." Violet's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Chase. Is that good or bad?" "It's good. You're honest and steady and brave. You see me clearly, not as a trophy or a business arrangement, but as a person, as myself." She took a breath. "I'm not ready for courtship either, but I would like you to stay. I would like to see what might grow between us." Relief washed over Colton's face. "Then I'll stay. I'll work hard, prove my worth to your father, and I'll wait. However long it takes. Even if it takes a long time, even if I need months to heal from Gerald." "However long it takes," Colton repeated. "I'm a patient man, Miss Ansley, and you're worth waiting for." In the gathering darkness, sitting on the porch of the ranch house, something shifted between them. Not a beginning, not yet, but the promise of one. The acknowledgement that what existed between them was real and valuable and worth nurturing. That night, for the first time since Gerald's betrayal, Violet went to bed feeling hopeful about the future. Not because someone had promised her romance or adventure or an easy life, but because someone had promised her honesty, patience, and partnership. Someone had seen her pain and hadn't tried to rush her past it. Someone had given her space to heal while quietly making it clear that he would be there when she was ready. In the bunkhouse, Colton Chase lay on his bunk and flexed his healing hands, thinking about Violet's words. "I would like you to stay." They weren't a declaration of love, but they were something. They were permission. They were possibility. He thought about the fire, about the moment when he'd heard that child crying and had known he would go into those flames regardless of the risk. He'd expected to die in there, had made peace with it, knowing that saving a child's life was worth his own. But he'd survived, had walked out of those flames burned but alive. And now he had something he hadn't expected, a reason to be grateful for that survival, a reason to look forward instead of back. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the mountains stood silent and eternal. The AA ranch settled into the rhythms of summer evening, horses moving in the corrals, the creek murmuring over stones, the wind sighing through the pines. And somewhere in that peaceful darkness, between the main house and the bunkhouse, hung the promise of something new, something that had begun with tears at a social and had grown through honesty and trial and fire into something that might, given time and patience, bloom into love. But that knowledge would come later. For now it was enough to have survived, to have hope, to have found in each other something both of them desperately needed, someone who saw them clearly and valued them anyway. Someone worth waiting for, someone worth staying for. The fire had tested them both and found them worthy. Now time would tell what they might build from the ashes. Summer deepened over Copper Creek, bringing long golden days and warm nights filled with the song of crickets. Colton's hands healed slowly but steadily, the angry burns fading to pale scars that would mark him forever. By late July, he was back to full work, though Violet noticed he sometimes flexed his fingers carefully, working out stiffness that would probably never entirely leave him. The fire had changed something in the community's perception of Colton Chase. Where once he'd been the stranger with a questionable past, now he was the man who'd saved the Halloran girl and little Tommy Chen. No relation to Mrs. Chen, but the coincidence of names had created a special bond between the housekeeper and the boy's family. People nodded to him on the street, invited him to Sunday dinners, asked his opinion on matters ranging from horse breeding to the best way to fireproof a barn. Violet watched this transformation with quiet pride. She saw how uncomfortable Colton was with the attention, how he deflected praise and insisted he'd only done what needed doing. But she also saw how he was slowly, almost reluctantly, allowing himself to become part of Copper Creek's fabric, to put down roots in a way he probably hadn't since leaving Texas. Their own relationship settled into a comfortable pattern that was somewhere between friendship and courtship. They worked together often. Colton would help her in the kitchen garden. She would assist him with the horses. They took long rides across the ranch, ostensibly checking fence lines or looking for strays, but really just enjoying each other's company. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from philosophy to the price of beef to whether Mrs. Henderson's apple pie was better than the one served at the hotel restaurant. Charles watched this developing relationship with cautious approval. One evening in early August, as he and Violet sat on the porch shelling peas, he brought it up directly. "You and Colton seem to be spending a lot of time together." Violet kept her eyes on her work. "He's good company. He's a good man. But honey, I need to know your intentions here. Because if you're just looking for friendship, that's fine. But if there's more to it, if you're developing feelings for him, then we need to think about propriety, about how things look." "How things look?" Violet repeated, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Like how it looked when Gerald courted me properly and then humiliated me in front of the whole town." "That's not what I meant." "I know, Papa, I'm sorry." Violet set down her bowl and looked at her father. "I do have feelings for Colton, but I'm not ready to act on them yet. I need more time to trust myself, to trust my judgment, and Colton understands that. He's not pushing for anything more than I'm ready to give." "That's good. That shows respect." Charles was quiet for a moment. "But time has a way of moving forward whether we're ready or not. Eventually you'll need to decide, is he just a friend or is he something more?" "I know," Violet said softly. "I'm working on it." But the truth was, she already knew. Somewhere in the quiet moments of working beside Colton, of watching him gentle a fractious horse, or listening to him read aloud on Sunday afternoons, her heart had made its choice. She loved him, not with the giddy excitement she'd felt for Gerald, but with something deeper and more certain. A love built on respect and trust and the simple pleasure of his company. The question was whether she was brave enough to admit it, to risk her heart again after it had been so badly broken. The answer came in an unexpected way. In mid-August, news spread through Copper Creek that the town would hold a charity social to raise money for the families who'd lost homes in the fire. It would be held in the same community hall where the spring social had taken place, where Gerald had announced his engagement and Violet had cried in front of everyone. "You don't have to go," Mary Catherine said when she came to invite Violet personally. "No one would blame you if you skipped it." But Violet surprised herself by saying, "No, I want to go. I want to show everyone that I've moved on, that I'm not hiding." "Will you bring someone? A date?" Louisa asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Violet hesitated. Would Colton want to go with her? Would it be too forward to ask? They'd been so careful to maintain that ambiguous space between friendship and courtship, and asking him to escort her to a social felt like crossing a line. But wasn't it time to cross some lines? Wasn't that the whole point? To stop being afraid and start living again? That evening, she found Colton in the barn, currying one of the horses. The late summer sun slanted through the open doors, turning the dust motes to gold. He looked up when she entered, his face breaking into a smile that made her heart skip. "Miss Ansley, come to check my work?" "Actually, I came to ask you something." Violet took a breath, gathering courage. "There's going to be a charity social in 3 weeks, for the fire victims. I was wondering if you'd escort me." Colton's hand stilled on the curry brush. "You want me to take you to a social? To the same hall where I cried in front of everyone because of Gerald? Yes. I know it seems strange, but I think I need to do this. To walk back into that space and show everyone, show myself, that I'm not broken, that I've moved past what happened." She met his eyes. "And I'd like you to be there with me, if you're willing." "Violet," Colton said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips sent warmth through her chest. "I would be honored to escort you. But are you sure? People will talk. They'll assume we're courting." "Let them assume. Maybe it's time they did." Something shifted in Colton's expression. Hope, joy, and a vulnerability that made him look younger than his years. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting Gerald's betrayal define how I see myself and what I'm willing to risk." Violet moved closer, her heart pounding. I'm saying that I care about you, Colton Chase, more than I probably should after knowing you only a few months. And I want to see where this goes between us, if you're still willing to wait for me to be ready. I'm willing, Colton said immediately. God, Violet, I'm more than willing. I've been waiting for you to be ready since that first night at the social, since I saw you crying and wanted nothing more than to make you smile. Then take me to this social, dance with me again, and this time let everyone know that we're together, that I choose you. Colton set down the brush and closed the distance between them. For a moment, Violet thought he might kiss her, but instead he took her hands, his scarred hands holding hers with infinite gentleness. I will make you a promise, he said quietly. I promise to be honest with you, always, to respect you and your feelings, to never ask for more than you're ready to give, and to choose you every single day for as long as you'll have me. That's all I need, Violet whispered, honesty and choice. Everything else will follow. They stood there in the golden light, hands clasped, and Violet felt something settle in her chest, a peace she hadn't known since before Gerald, maybe even before her mother died. This was right. This was real. And whatever happened at the social, whatever gossip or judgment might come, it didn't matter, because she had finally found someone worth the risk. The 3 weeks before the social passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The whole town was involved in organizing the event, decorating the hall, arranging food, spreading word to neighboring communities. Mary Catherine and Louisa insisted on helping Violet choose a dress, though she refused to buy anything new. I want to wear something I already own, she said firmly. Something that's mine, that I chose for myself, not to impress anyone else. She settled on a simple dress of deep blue cotton with white embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It had been her mother's once, altered to fit Violet after she'd grown. Wearing it felt like carrying her mother's strength with her. The night before the social, Violet found herself too restless to sleep. She slipped outside onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool mountain air. To her surprise, she found Colton already there, sitting on the steps and looking up at the stars. Couldn't sleep either? She asked, settling beside him. Too much thinking. He glanced at her. Nervous about tomorrow? A little. It feels like a test somehow, like I'm proving something, though I'm not sure exactly what. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I know, but I want to. I want to walk into that hall without shame or fear. I want to show Gerald and everyone else that his betrayal didn't destroy me. She paused. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense. Colton was quiet for a moment, then said, There's something I should tell you about Gerald. Violet's stomach tightened. What about him? He came by the ranch last week while you were in town with Mrs. Chen. Your father wasn't here either. He'd ridden out to check the north pasture. It was just me and Jack. What did he want? To warn me away from you. He said I was taking advantage of your vulnerability, that I was using the fire hero business to worm my way into your life. He said I wasn't good enough for you and never would be. Colton's voice was carefully neutral, but Violet could hear the anger underneath. He said some other things too, about my past, about being a killer, about how no decent woman would want anything to do with me once she came to her senses. Rage flared hot in Violet's chest. That bastard! What did you say to him? I told him that what was between you and me was none of his business, that he'd lost any right to have opinions about your life when he chose someone else, and that if he came around again, I'd have your father throw him off the property. Colton looked at her directly. But Violet, you should know, he's planning to be at the social tomorrow, he and Penelope. They're still in town, apparently having trouble finding a suitable property for whatever banking venture Gerald's planning. Let them come, Violet said fiercely. Let them watch us together. Let Gerald see that I don't need him, that I've found someone infinitely better. I'm not better than him to make a point. I'm just different. You're better, Violet insisted. You're honest and brave and kind. You see me as a person, not a possession. You respect my choices even when they're hard. That makes you infinitely better than Gerald Whitman could ever be. Colton reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle despite the scars on his hands. Tomorrow night, when we walk into that hall, I want you to know something.
I'm not doing this to make Gerald jealous or to prove anything to the town. I'm doing it because being with you, dancing with you, makes me happier than anything else I can imagine. Whatever happens, whatever people say, that's what matters to me." "To me too," Violet said softly. They sat together on the steps for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the ranch.
And when Violet finally went to bed, she slept deeply and dreamlessly, all her nervousness burned away by the certainty of Colton's presence in her life. The day of the social dawned bright and clear. Violet spent the morning helping Mrs. Chen prepare dishes to bring, her mother's recipe for apple cake, fresh bread, preserves from their own fruit trees. She bathed carefully, washed and dried her hair until it shone, then dressed in her mother's blue dress with trembling fingers. When she came downstairs, her father was waiting in the parlor, dressed in his Sunday best. His eyes got suspiciously bright when he saw her. "You look just like your mother did the first time I took her to a dance," he said gruffly. "She'd be so proud of you, honey, of how strong you've become." "I don't feel strong, Papa. I feel terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Charles pulled her into a hug. "You're going to walk in there with a good man on your arm, and you're going to show everyone that you're happy. That's all you need to do." Colton arrived at the house just before sunset, and Violet's breath caught when she saw him. He'd gotten a haircut in town, trimmed his beard, and wore clean-pressed clothes that, while simple, fit him well. But it was the look in his eyes when he saw her that made her heart race, a mixture of admiration and tenderness that told her more clearly than words that she was precious to him. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "So do you. Handsome, I mean." Violet felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. They rode to town in the wagon, Charles and Mrs. Chen accompanying them. The community hall was already alive with lantern light and music when they arrived. Violet could see people streaming in, hear the sound of laughter and conversation. Her hands started shaking. Colton helped her down from the wagon, then offered his arm. "Ready?" "No, but let's go anyway." They walked toward the hall together, and Violet felt every eye turn toward them. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. "There's Violet Ansley with that cowboy, the one who saved the children. They look good together. Wonder what Gerald will think." The hall was decorated with paper streamers and wildflowers, the tables laden with food donations from every family in the county. The musicians were already playing, a lively reel that had several couples on the dance floor. And there, near the refreshment table, stood Gerald and Penelope. Gerald saw them immediately. His face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, anger, and something that might have been jealousy. Penelope looked curious, her eyes assessing Violet and Colton with the careful evaluation of someone used to judging social situations. Violet lifted her chin and walked directly past them, Colton steady at her side. They stopped to greet friends, to thank people for their kind words about the fire, to admire the decorations. And through it all, Violet felt herself relaxing. This wasn't the same as that terrible night in spring. She wasn't alone and vulnerable. She was with someone who valued her, and she was here by choice, not obligation. "Violet?" Mary Catherine rushed over, Louisa close behind. "You look wonderful, and Mr. Chase, you clean up very nicely." "Thank you, ladies," Colton said with a small bow that made them giggle. "You have to tell us everything," Louisa whispered urgently. "Are you courting? Is it official?" "We're together," Violet said simply. "That's all that matters." The musicians struck up a waltz, and Colton turned to her. "May I have this dance?" "You may." They moved onto the dance floor, and suddenly Violet was transported back to that first night, standing in the same space, crying and humiliated, feeling like her world had ended. But Colton had stepped forward then, had offered comfort and dignity when she'd needed it most, and now here they were again, but everything was different. "You're thinking too much," Colton said softly. "I can see it on your face." "I was just remembering that first dance." "I remember too. You were the most beautiful woman in the room, even with tears on your face, maybe especially then, because you were so honest, so real." He pulled her a little closer, still proper, but intimate. "And I remember thinking I would do anything to see you smile. I'm smiling now." I noticed. It's my favorite sight in the world. They danced through the waltz and into the next song, a slower, more romantic melody. Around them, other couples swayed, but Violet was only aware of Colton, his steady presence, the warmth of his hand on her waist, the way he looked at her like she was the only person who mattered. When the song ended, they stepped outside for air. The night was cool and perfect, stars brilliant overhead. The sounds of the social continued inside. Music, laughter, the hum of conversation. But out here, in the quiet darkness, it was just the two of them. "Thank you," Violet said, "for tonight, for being here with me." "Violet, there's nowhere else I'd rather be." Colton took her hands in his scarred fingers gentle against her skin. "I know we've been taking things slowly, letting you heal in your own time. And I'm still willing to wait as long as you need. But I need you to know something." "What?" "I love you." The words were quiet but firm, leaving no room for doubt. "I've loved you since that night I saw you crying. Maybe even before that, in some way I didn't understand. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the good in people. I love how you work in the garden with dirt under your fingernails and how you read poetry to yourself when you think no one's listening. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day." Violet's eyes filled with tears, but these were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too, Colton. I think I have for a while now, but I was too scared to admit it, too scared to trust myself again after Gerald. And now? Now I'm not scared anymore. Or I am, but I'm doing it anyway, because you're worth the risk, because what we have is real and solid and true." She stepped closer, looking up at him. "I don't need more time, Colton. I'm ready. I choose you." For a heartbeat, they stood frozen in the moment. Then Colton cupped her face in his scarred hands and kissed her. It was nothing like Gerald's kisses had been, performative and calculated. This was honest and tender and full of promise. It tasted like coming home, like finding something you'd been searching for without knowing you were searching. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were trembling. "That was—" Violet couldn't find words. "That was everything," Colton finished. "That was the beginning of forever, if you'll have me." "I'll have you," Violet whispered, "for however long forever turns out to be." They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, while inside the social continued without them. And if anyone noticed they were missing, if anyone gossiped about what the Ansley girl and that cowboy were doing outside alone, it didn't matter. Because Violet and Colton had found something that transcended gossip and judgment. They'd found each other. When they finally went back inside, hand in hand this time, the first person they saw was Gerald. He stood near the door, clearly having been watching for their return. His face was carefully neutral, but Violet saw the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched. "Violet," he said, "could I speak with you, privately?" "No," she said simply. "We have nothing to discuss." "Please, just one moment." Colton's hand tightened on hers, but he didn't speak. This was her choice to make. Violet looked at Gerald, really looked at him for the first time since the spring social. She saw a man who'd chosen comfort over courage, money over honesty, and who was only now realizing what he'd lost. "All right," she said finally, "but Colton stays with me." Gerald's mouth tightened, but he nodded. They moved to a quieter corner of the hall, away from curious ears. Gerald looked at Colton with barely concealed hostility, then turned to Violet. "I made a mistake," he said, "choosing Penelope over you. I see that now. She's not happy here. She complains constantly. Nothing is good enough, refined enough. And she doesn't understand me the way you did." "Understood," Violet corrected. Past tense. "I don't understand you anymore, Gerald. I'm not sure I ever really did. We could start over. I could end things with Penelope, explain that there was a misunderstanding. Stop." Violet held up her hand. Just stop. Even if I weren't with Colton, even if I were alone and lonely, I would never take you back. Do you know why?" Gerald's face reddened. "Why?" "Because you taught me what I don't want in a partner. You taught me that pretty words without honest action mean nothing. That someone who will betray you publicly to advance their own interests isn't worth loving." She stepped closer to Colton, feeling his solid presence beside her. And then Colton taught me what I do want: honesty, respect, someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession, someone who chooses me not because I'm convenient or advantageous, but because they genuinely love who I am. This is because of him, Gerald spat, glaring at Colton. He's turned you against me. No, Colton said quietly. You did that yourself. I just happened to be there to help pick up the pieces. Gerald looked like he wanted to say more, but Penelope appeared at his elbow, her face pinched with displeasure. Gerald, I want to leave. This entire event is provincial, and the food is barely edible. In a moment, Penelope. Now, Gerald? Her voice was sharp, imperious. Unless you'd rather I return to Boston alone. Gerald's face went through several expressions: anger, frustration, resignation. Finally, he looked at Violet one last time. I hope you don't regret this. I won't, Violet said with absolute certainty. Goodbye, Gerald. She watched him leave with Penelope, saw the way he hunched his shoulders under her criticism, and felt nothing but relief. That could have been her life, walking on eggshells trying to be good enough for someone who would never be satisfied. Instead, she had Colton, who loved her exactly as she was. You all right? Colton asked softly. I'm perfect. I'm finally completely free of him. They returned to the dance floor, and this time, when they waltzed, Violet felt like she was floating. The whispers had changed, no longer pitying or curious, but approving. She heard snatches of conversation as they moved past. They looked good together. About time she found someone worthy of her. That Chase fellow is a hero, saving those children. Charles Ansley must be pleased. And indeed, when Violet caught her father's eye across the room, she saw approval and happiness there. Charles raised his glass in a subtle toast, and Violet smiled back, feeling blessed beyond measure. The social continued late into the night. They danced until Violet's feet ached, ate Mrs. Henderson's famous pie, and talked with friends and neighbors who congratulated them on their courtship. By the time they left, well past midnight, Violet was exhausted but happier than she could remember being in years. On the ride home, with Charles and Mrs. Chen dozing in the back of the wagon, Colton and Violet sat close together on the driver's bench. The horses knew the way home, so Colton let the reins rest easy in his hands. Thank you for tonight, Violet said, resting her head on his shoulder. For being patient with me. For waiting until I was ready. Thank you for being worth the wait. Colton kissed the top of her head. Violet, I know we just started courting officially, but I need you to know my intentions. I want to marry you, not right away. We'll take whatever time you need, but eventually. I want to build a life with you. I want that too, Violet said. I want mornings working side by side and evenings on the porch watching the sunset. I want to raise children who know they're loved. I want to grow old with you and still be able to make each other laugh. That sounds perfect to me. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking, the horses' hooves thudding softly on the dirt road. Overhead, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, witnessing the beginning of a love story that would endure. When they reached the ranch, Colton helped everyone down from the wagon, then walked Violet to the porch. Charles and Mrs. Chen had already gone inside, giving them a moment of privacy. I should say good night, Colton said, though he made no move to leave. You should, Violet agreed, equally still. He kissed her again, sweet and lingering, a promise of all the kisses to come. When they finally parted, both of them were smiling. Good night, Violet Ansley. Good night, Colton Chase. She watched him walk across the yard to the bunkhouse, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs to her room, and stood at the window looking out over the ranch. The same ranch she'd grown up on, but somehow it felt different now. It felt like the beginning of something instead of just the continuation of what had always been. That night, as she drifted off to sleep still wearing her mother's blue dress, Violet thought about the journey she'd taken, from tears at a spring social to love at a summer one, from humiliation to triumph, from broken trust to renewed faith in herself and others. She thought about Gerald and felt only pity for him, trapped in a life built on calculations instead of love. And she thought about Colton, about his scarred hands and brave heart, about the way he'd seen her crying and had stepped forward when no one else would. The cowboy had found her crying at the social. He'd taken her into his arms, literally and figuratively, and called her his own. Not as a possession, but as a partner. Not as a trophy, but as an equal. And in doing so, he'd given her back the thing Gerald had tried to take, her faith in love itself. As sleep finally claimed her, Violet's last conscious thought was of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. Mornings working beside Colton, evenings planning their future. A life built on honesty and trust and the simple joy of choosing each other every single day. The social that had begun in tears had ended in triumph. The girl who'd been broken had been made whole. And the stranger who'd arrived in Copper Creek looking for work had found something infinitely more valuable. A home, a purpose, and a love that would last forever. In the bunkhouse, Colton lay on his bunk with his hands behind his head, unable to stop smiling. His past was behind him, the Garrett brothers lost somewhere in the vast territory between here and Texas. His present was good, meaningful work, a place he belonged, respect from the community. And his future stretched ahead bright with promise, centered on a woman with dark hair and a brave heart who'd chosen him despite everything. He thought about the moment he'd first seen her crying, about the impulse that had driven him to help a stranger. If he'd walked past, if he'd decided it wasn't his business, his life would be completely different now. He'd probably be drifting still, alone and rootless, running from shadows. Instead, he had Violet. He had the AA ranch. He had a life worth living and a future worth building. Outside, the Colorado night settled over the ranch like a benediction. The mountains stood eternal, the stars burned bright, and somewhere in the darkness, two hearts beat in quiet synchrony, knowing they had found in each other exactly what they'd been searching for all along. The dance of redemption was complete. The cowboy and the girl he'd found crying had written their own story, one that would be told in Copper Creek for generations to come. A tale of kindness rewarded, courage recognized, and love earned through patience and truth. And if anyone happened to pass the community hall that night, they might have seen through the windows one last couple dancing long after everyone else had gone home. Not really there, but present in memory, turning in eternal circles on a floor where tears had once fallen, and joy had finally, triumphantly, replaced them. The weeks following the charity social brought a subtle but profound shift to the rhythms of the AA ranch. Where once Colton and Violet had maintained careful boundaries, now they moved through their days with the easy intimacy of acknowledged courtship. They still worked side by side, that hadn't changed, but now Colton might rest his hand on the small of her back as they walked, or Violet might reach up to brush hay from his hair without thinking twice. The ranch hands grew accustomed to finding them together in the barn at sunset, talking quietly as the light faded, or sitting on the porch steps after supper sharing comfortable silence. Charles watched this development with satisfaction. One evening in early September, as he and Colton were mending tack in the barn, he brought up what had been on his mind for weeks. "I'm getting older," Charles said without preamble, "and this ranch is getting bigger. We've added 200 head since spring, and I'm looking at acquiring the Morrison property to the east, another 1,000 acres of good grazing land." Colton looked up from the bridle he was repairing. "That's ambitious, sir. The Morrison place borders the National Forest land, doesn't it?" "It does, which means access to high summer pasture and protection from development on one side." Charles set down his work and looked directly at Colton. But managing that kind of expansion takes more than one man. It takes partnership. It takes someone I can trust completely, who knows cattle and land and has the respect of the other hands. "I'm honored you think of me that way, sir. I'm not just thinking, I'm offering. I want you to become a partner in this ranch, Colton. Not just a foreman, a real partner with a stake in the business. 25% to start, with the understanding that when I'm gone, the ranch goes to Violet and whoever she chooses to marry." Charles paused meaningfully. "I'm assuming that's you." Colton's hand stilled on the leather. "Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes or no, but think about it first." Charles leaned back against the workbench. "I need to know this ranch will be in good hands when I can't run it anymore. And more than that, I need to know Violet will have a partner who can shoulder the burden with her. She's strong and capable, but no one should carry this alone. I learned that after my wife died. Mr. Ansley, I care about Violet more than anything in this world. I want to marry her. I've told her as much,
but I don't want you to think I'm after the ranch or that I'm using her to secure my future. If I thought that, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Charles's voice was firm. I've watched you for months now. I've seen how you work, how you treat people, how you love my daughter. You're not after security or wealth. You're after a life worth living.
And that's exactly the kind of man I want for Violet and for this ranch. Then, yes, Colton said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, sir, I accept. And I promise you I'll honor that trust every day of my life. They shook hands, and Charles pulled Colton into a brief, backslapping embrace. Welcome to the family, son. Now all you have to do is make it official with Violet. That night, Colton lay awake in the bunkhouse thinking about the future. He'd come to Copper Creek with nothing but the clothes on his back and a past that haunted him. Now he had a partnership in a thriving ranch, the respect of a community, and the love of a woman who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. It felt almost too good to be real, like a dream he might wake from at any moment. But it was real, and it was time to take the next step. The following Saturday, Colton rode into town with a specific purpose. He went to the bank, not Gerald's father's bank, but the smaller institution run by a man named Theodore Walsh, and withdrew most of his savings. Then he visited the jeweler, a German immigrant named Hans Beckmann, who was known for his fine craftsmanship. I need a ring, Colton said, an engagement ring, nothing fancy or elaborate, something simple and strong, something that will last. Hans studied him thoughtfully. You have someone in mind, or should I guess? Violet Annesley. Ah, Hans smiled. A good woman. Her mother used to come to my shop. I made her wedding ring, you know. Charles brought me the gold himself from a claim he'd worked before ranching. Said he wanted something that came from his own hands. Do you still have any of that gold? I do, actually. Enough for a simple band. Would you like me to use it as a connection to her mother? Colton felt his throat tighten. I think Violet would like that very much. They discussed designs, and Hans showed Colton his options. In the end, they settled on a delicate band with a small sapphire. Not a diamond, which felt too much like trying to compete with wealth, but a deep blue stone that reminded Colton of the Colorado sky at twilight. It will take me 2 weeks, Hans said. Maybe 3. I want to do this right. Take whatever time you need. I want it to be perfect. As Colton left the jewelry shop, he nearly collided with someone on the sidewalk. He looked up to find himself face to face with Gerald Whitman. They both froze. Gerald's eyes flicked to the jewelry shop behind Colton, and understanding dawned on his face. For a moment, something like pain crossed his expression. Then his usual mask of superiority slipped back into place. Buying jewelry? Gerald said. How domestic of you. Gerald, Colton kept his voice neutral. How's the banking business? Fine. Excellent, actually. We're close to finalizing a location for the new branch. Good. I'm happy for you. Gerald laughed bitterly. Are you? I doubt that. He glanced back toward the jewelry shop. You're going to propose to her. It wasn't a question, so Colton didn't answer. Gerald shook his head slowly. I suppose I should have seen this coming. The hero gets the girl. Isn't that how these stories go? His voice was sharp with self-loathing. I had everything, you know. Violet loved me. Her father approved of me. I could have had a good life here. But I wanted more. I wanted prestige and connections and the kind of wealth that comes from marrying well. And you got it, Colton said quietly. You got exactly what you chose. Did I? Penelope makes it very clear every day that Copper Creek is beneath her, that I'm beneath her. She only agreed to move here because her father insisted. She resents me for it, resents this place, these people, everything about the life I'm trying to build. Gerald met Colton's eyes. I chose poorly. I know that now. But knowing it doesn't change anything. No, it doesn't. Colton felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the man. But you can choose differently going forward. You can choose to make the best of what you have, to find something real with Penelope if you try. Or you can keep comparing your life to what you gave up and make yourself miserable. That's up to you. Sage advice from the ranch hand turned hero. Just a man who's made his own share of mistakes. The difference is, I learned from them. Colton stepped aside.
I hope you find what you're looking for, Gerald. I really do. But it's not Violet. She deserves better than being someone's regret. He walked away without looking back, leaving Gerald standing on the sidewalk staring after him. When Colton returned to the ranch that afternoon, he found Violet in the kitchen garden harvesting the last of the summer vegetables. She looked up at his approach, her face breaking into a smile that made his heart skip. "How was town?" "Productive." He helped her gather the tomatoes into her basket. "I ran into Gerald." Violet's smile faded slightly. "How was that?" "Sad, mostly. He's not happy, Violet. His marriage is already strained, and I think he's realizing what he gave up." "I don't feel sorry for him," Violet said firmly. "He made his choice. We all have to live with our choices." "True enough." Colton took the full basket from her and set it aside, then caught her hands in his. "Speaking of choices, there's something I want to talk to you about. Your father made me an offer." He explained about the partnership, watching Violet's face as he spoke. She listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding to something that looked like pride. "Papa's been talking about taking on a partner for over a year," she said when he finished. "But he never found anyone he trusted enough. The fact that he's offering it to you means he sees you as family already." That's what he said. He also said that when he's gone, the ranch would go to you and whoever you choose to marry. And he's assuming that's you. "Is it?" Colton asked, his heart pounding. "I know we've only been courting officially for a few weeks, but Violet, I've known since that first night at the social. You're the one I want to build a life with. The question is, am I the one you want?" Violet stepped closer, her hands still clasped in his. "Colton Chase, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You're exactly who I want, today, tomorrow, and every day after that." "Then marry me." The words came out more urgently than he'd planned. "I know it's sudden, and I don't even have the ring yet. I ordered it today. It won't be ready for a few weeks, but I need you to know. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this ranch together, raise a family here, grow old watching sunsets from that porch. Will you marry me, Violet Ansley?" Tears spilled down Violet's cheeks, but she was smiling, radiant with joy. "Yes, yes, of course, yes. I don't need a ring to know this is right. I've known for months." Colton pulled her into his arms and kissed her, pouring everything he felt into that kiss, love and gratitude and wonder that this remarkable woman had chosen him. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "We should tell your father," Colton said. "He already knows. Why do you think he offered you the partnership?" Violet wiped her eyes, still grinning. "Papa's about as subtle as a thunderstorm. He was giving us his blessing." They found Charles in the barn, and when they told him the news, he pretended to be surprised for exactly 3 seconds before breaking into a huge smile. "About damn time. When's the wedding?" "We haven't discussed that yet," Violet said, laughing. "We got engaged about 5 minutes ago." "Well, discuss it and let me know. I'll need to order a new suit." Charles pulled them both into a hug. "I'm happy for you both. Your mother would have loved him, honey. He's exactly the kind of man she always said you deserved." The news spread through Copper Creek with the speed of wildfire. By Sunday service, everyone knew that Violet Ansley and Colton Chase were engaged. The congregation congratulated them warmly, with even stern Mrs. Pritchard admitting that they made a handsome couple. Mary Catherine and Louisa were beside themselves with excitement, immediately volunteering to help with wedding preparations. Gerald and Penelope were noticeably absent from church that Sunday, and rumor had it they'd left town for Denver. Whether they'd return was anyone's guess. In the weeks that followed, Violet and Colton fell into the easy partnership that would define their marriage. They worked together to plan not just the wedding but their future, where they would live, how they would manage the ranch, what they hoped to build together. Colton officially accepted Charles's partnership offer, and they drew up papers making it legal. The ranch became the AA Chase Ranch, a name that would be known throughout Colorado Territory for generations to come. Hans Beckman finished the ring in mid-October, and when Colton saw it, he knew it was perfect. The band was simple gold, the same gold Charles had mined for his wife's ring, and the small sapphire caught the light like captured sky. That evening, he presented it to Violet formally,
kneeling on the porch where they'd shared so many conversations. "This is your mother's gold," he told her as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Hans said your father mined it himself before they married. I wanted you to carry that connection with you, to know that the love your parents shared lives on in what we're building." Violet looked at the ring through tears, then at Colton. "It's perfect. You're perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "I'm the lucky one. You could have chosen safety, comfort, someone without scars and a dark past. But you chose honesty and partnership in me. That's a gift I'll spend the rest of my life honoring." They set the wedding date for early November, after the fall cattle drive, but before the winter snows made travel difficult. Violet wanted something simple and meaningful. A ceremony under the aspen trees near the creek, with family and close friends. No elaborate dress or fancy decorations, just the people they loved and the land they'd build their life on. The day before the wedding, Colton rode out alone to the high pasture, needing a moment to process everything that was about to happen. He found a spot overlooking the valley, dismounted, and simply sat with the enormity of his transformation. A year ago, he'd been running from his past, drifting from town to town with no real purpose beyond survival. He'd killed a man in self-defense and been branded a murderer by vengeful relatives. He'd lost his first love to someone wealthier and more secure. He'd had nothing, no home, no family, no future beyond the next job and the next town. Now he sat on land he partially owned, preparing to marry a woman he loved more than life itself, surrounded by a community that respected him, and a family that had claimed him as their own. The scars on his hands from the fire would always remind him of the cost of courage, but they also represented transformation, the moment when he'd gone from outsider to hero, from hired hand to family. "Thank you," he said quietly to the universe, to God, to whatever force had led him to Copper Creek on that April evening. "Thank you for the second chance. I promise I'll make the most of it." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, one of those crisp November mornings when the air is sharp with the promise of winter, but the sun still holds warmth. The aspen trees had turned to gold, their leaves shimmering in the breeze like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Violet had chosen this spot because it was where her mother was buried, in a small family cemetery marked by a simple stone. She wanted her mother's presence, in whatever form it could take, to witness this moment. The guest list was intimate, about 30 people, including the ranch hands, Mrs. Chen, Mary Catherine, and Louisa, several neighbors, and the pastor from town. Charles had insisted on hiring musicians, the same trio who'd played at both socials, and Mrs. Chen had spent days preparing food for the celebration that would follow. Colton stood beneath the aspens with the pastor, wearing new clothes that actually fit him properly, dark pants, a white shirt, a vest that Violet had embroidered with his initials. His hands were steady despite his racing heart. Jack and Tom stood beside him as witnesses, both of them grinning like fools. Then the musicians struck up a simple melody, and Violet appeared on her father's arm. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her. It was ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves, elegant in its simplicity. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, held back from her face by flowers from the garden, and on her hand, catching the sunlight, was the ring Colton had given her. But it was her face that stopped Colton's breath, radiant with joy, eyes bright with happy tears, smiling at him like he was the answer to every question she'd ever asked. This was the woman who'd cried in his arms at a social, who'd nursed his burns with gentle hands, who'd chosen him over safety and convention. This was his future walking toward him. Charles kissed his daughter's cheek, then placed her hand in Colton's. "Take care of her," he said gruffly. "She's all I've got." "I will, sir. I promise." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises of honesty and partnership, of choosing each other daily, of building a life based on respect and love. When the pastor pronounced them married and Colton kissed his wife for the first time, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was filled with laughter and music and dancing. They ate Mrs. Chen's incredible food, drank toast to the future, and danced on the grass beneath the golden aspens. Violet danced with her father, tears streaming down both their faces, and Colton danced with Mrs. Chen, who whispered in his ear, "You make her happy. That's all that matters."
As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Colton and Violet slipped away from the party. They walked hand in hand to the creek, the same place where Colton had first told her he wanted to stay, where they'd acknowledged their feelings months ago. "Mrs. Chase," Colton said, testing out the name, "how does it feel?" "Perfect." Violet leaned against him, watching the water flow over the rocks. "Everything about this day has been perfect, but you know what the best part is? Tell me." "Knowing that tomorrow isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning. We get to wake up together and build a life day by day, choice by choice. We get forever." "Forever," Colton agreed, pulling her closer. "That's exactly what I want with you." They stayed there as the light faded and the first stars appeared, holding each other and listening to the creek and the wind in the trees. Behind them, they could hear the celebration continuing, but here in their own private moment, the world was reduced to just the two of them and the promise of all the tomorrows to come. The years that followed were filled with the hard work and simple joys of ranch life. Colton proved to be an exceptional partner, expanding the AA Chase Ranch into one of the most successful operations in Colorado. He and Charles worked together seamlessly, with Violet managing the business side and coordinating with buyers and suppliers. The ranch became known not just for quality beef, but for fair dealing and ethical treatment of both animals and workers. In the spring of 1877, Violet gave birth to their first daughter, a girl with Colton's blue-gray eyes and Violet's dark hair. They named her Sarah after Violet's mother. Charles wept when he held his granddaughter for the first time, saying she had his wife's gentle spirit. 2 years later, a second daughter arrived, Rose, fierce and independent from the moment she drew breath. The girls grew up riding horses before they could properly walk, learning the land and the work alongside their parents. Colton taught them to gentle, difficult horses with patience, while Violet taught them to read by lantern light and to see the poetry in everyday moments. Gerald Whitman never did establish his banking empire in Copper Creek. He and Penelope left for Denver permanently, and rumor had it they'd eventually divorced, an unusual scandal even in progressive Colorado. Gerald remarried years later to a widow with children of her own, and by all accounts finally found contentment in a life of moderate comfort rather than grand ambition. Jack and Tom both married local girls and stayed on at the ranch, becoming like uncles to Sarah and Rose. Mrs. Chen remained with the family until her peaceful death in 1890, beloved by 3 generations. Charles lived to see both his granddaughters married, dying contentedly in his sleep at the age of 73, secure in the knowledge that his ranch and his daughter were in good hands. But those stories come later. For now, in the autumn of 1875, as Violet and Colton Chase stood by the creek on their wedding night, they were simply 2 people who'd found each other against all odds. A man who'd been running from his past, and a woman who'd been humiliated in front of her entire community. A stranger and a crying girl at a social. "Do you remember that night?" Violet asked, as if reading his thoughts. "The spring social?" "Every detail. You were wearing lavender, your hair was up, and you were crying like your heart was breaking." "It was breaking. Or I thought it was." She looked up at him. "But hearts are stronger than we give them credit for. They can break and heal and become even stronger than before. You taught me that." "You taught me something too," Colton said. "You taught me that running from your past doesn't work. That real strength comes from standing still, putting down roots, letting people see who you really are. You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness, it's courage." "We taught each other," Violet corrected. "That's what partnership means." Years later, when Sarah and Rose were teenagers riding their ponies across the ranch land, they would ask their mother to tell the story of how she and their father met. Violet would smile and begin the tale. About a social in the spring, about a man who saw her crying and stepped forward when no one else would, about a dance that changed 2 lives forever. "Your father saved me that night," she would always say. "Not by dancing with me or walking me home, though those things mattered. He saved me by seeing me, really seeing me, and believing I was worth the effort of getting to know. And in return, I'd like to think I saved him too. From running, from loneliness, from the belief that his past defined his future." The story of the cowboy who found the girl crying at the social became legend in Copper Creek. Old-timers would tell it in the saloon,
Mothers would whisper it to daughters preparing for their own first heartbreaks. It became a story about second chances and choosing wisely, about looking past surfaces to see what really matters. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was the one only Colton and Violet knew. The story of two wounded people finding each other at exactly the right moment. The story of patience and trust building into love. The story of choosing each other not once but every day, through hardships and joys. Through the mundane routines of ranch life and the extraordinary moments that punctuate any long marriage. They grew old together on that ranch, watching their daughters have children of their own, seeing the land they'd built flourish and grow. Colton's hair turned silver, and the scars on his hands faded to pale lines that only showed in certain light. Violet's face gained the gentle lines of a life well lived, each wrinkle earned through laughter or worry or the simple passage of time. On their 40th wedding anniversary, they stood in the same spot where they'd been married, now elderly but still holding hands like young lovers. The aspen trees had grown taller, and Charles's grave had been joined by others, Jack, Mrs. Chen, friends and neighbors who'd been part of their story. 40 years, Violet said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. Would you do it again? Colton asked. If you could go back to that night at the social, knowing everything that would follow, the hard work, the struggles, the losses, would you still let me dance with you? Every single time, Violet said without hesitation. I'd choose you in every lifetime, through every difficulty, because you're my bedrock, Colton. You're my home. And you're mine, Colton replied, kissing her forehead with the tenderness of 4 decades of love. You always have been, from the moment I saw you crying. I just didn't know it yet. They stood there as the sun set over the mountains one more time, two people who'd built a life from tears and courage and the simple choice to keep choosing each other. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with lamplight, filled with the sounds of their grandchildren playing. The land stretched out in all directions, fertile and productive, a testament to years of careful stewardship. This was what they'd built together. Not just a ranch, not just a family, but a legacy of love and partnership that would endure long after they were gone. The story that had begun with a cowboy finding a girl crying at a social had become something larger than either of them, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. In Copper Creek, they still talk about Colton and Violet Chase, about how he saved 2 children from a fire and won the heart of Charles Ansley's daughter, about how she chose the drifter over the banker's son and never regretted it for a single day, about how their partnership transformed the AA Ranch into an empire that employed half the county. But the story the old-timers love best is the simplest one, the story of a man who saw a woman crying and couldn't walk away, who offered comfort when she needed it most and then waited patiently until she was ready to trust again, who proved through actions rather than words that he was worthy of her love, and the story of a woman who had the courage to risk her heart again after it had been broken, who looked past scars and rumors to see the man beneath, who chose honesty over security and partnership over romance, and in doing so found something more valuable than either, a love that lasted. The cowboy found her crying at the social. He took her into his arms and called her his own. Not in that moment. It would take months for them to get there, but eventually, inevitably, as surely as the sun rises over the Colorado mountains. And she never let him go. Through 40 years of marriage, through joy and sorrow, and the everyday miracle of building a life together, she held on to him as surely as he held on to her. That's the real story. Not about a single moment of rescue, but about 2 people rescuing each other, day after day, year after year. 2 people who prove that the best love stories aren't about grand gestures or dramatic moments, but about steady choices and quiet devotion and the simple decision to keep showing up for each other. In the end, that's what matters. Not how the story begins, but how it continues. How 2 people take their broken pieces and build something whole. How they transform tears into laughter, fear into courage, and loneliness into belonging. The cowboy and the girl at the social became the Chases of the AA Chase Ranch. They became parents and grandparents, partners and friends. They became a love story that Copper Creek would remember long after the last person who knew them personally had passed. But more importantly, they became exactly what they'd promised each other on that autumn day beneath the aspens. They became partners who chose each other daily, They became the bedrock each other could build on. They became home. And that, more than any other detail, is why their story endures. Because everyone who hears it recognizes something true in it. The hope that kindness will be rewarded. The belief that past mistakes don't have to define our futures. The faith that somewhere out there is someone who will see us clearly and choose us anyway. The cowboy found her crying at the social. And in finding her, he found himself. In saving her, he was saved. In choosing her, he chose the life he'd always wanted but never thought he deserved. And she chose him right back, proving that the best love stories are the ones we write ourselves, one choice at a time, one day at a time. Until one day we look up and realize we've built forever. That's how it happened in Copper Creek, Colorado, in the year 1875. And that's how love still happens, in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different places. When two broken people find each other at exactly the right moment and decide to stop running, to stand still, to build something beautiful from their shared courage. The end of the story is really just the beginning of forever for two people who found each other when they needed it most and never let go.